Hey guys, Matt here from Seeds of Awareness. Welcome to the Awakening series. This is episode 8 and this is titled Entities and Mind Parasites. So I'm going to be getting a bit fringe and paranormal on you in this episode. So for some of you who haven't explored these topics, it might seem a bit out there, but I think this is one of the most important topics to explore and discuss, especially for anyone on the awakening path, because you inevitably will come up against hidden forces that are going to try and deter you on your path and stop you in your progress. And I'm going to be focusing more on the negative hidden forces. There are positive forces and negative forces in the unseen hidden realms that you might refer to as entities or whatever you want to call them. But it's particularly the negative entities that want to really interfere with our progress, really want to interfere with our evolution. And in many aspects, these forces are actually predatory. If they can manipulate us and manipulate us into states of anguish and despair and pain and suffering, then they actually feed off that emotional energy that we give off. Because these beings being non-physical, they don't feed off physical food like we do. They actually feed off more food in its more energetic form. And being negatively oriented beings, they more feed off the more negatively oriented energies, such as the ones I just mentioned, like fear, pain, and suffering. So the thing with this topic that's really, really important to grasp, and truthfully I found really, really life-changing, is understanding that the mind is not actually a private place. And that's something that most of the human population don't even consider. We just take for granted that our mind, we just assume that our mind is just a private place. It's ours. It's our private place. Our thoughts, our feelings, no one or nothing around us can interfere with those or touch them. But I now firmly believe that this isn't the case, and that there are hidden forces that can most definitely interfere with the mind, that they can inject themselves into our mind. And that's why I call them mind parasites. And I actually got that term from a book, I believe it was from the late 60s, maybe 1968, by a man named Colin Wilson. He wrote a book called The Mind Parasites, and it discusses this. It's a brilliant book. It's also available on audiobook, and I highly recommend reading or listening to it, because that book's very much like in the same sort of realm of like 1984 and Brave New World, where the authors clearly had a message that they wanted to send humanity. But they knew that if they just came out and just said it directly, everyone would think they were crazy. So they very cleverly weaved the truth of their message into a fictional sort of sci-fi narrative that wouldn't get rejected by normies, by the mainstream, because they were just like, well, it's just imagination. It's just his imagination. It's sci-fi. It's fiction. It's made up. Whereas those on the esoteric path, those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear, they can see the messages that these people have weaved into their books. And Mind Parasites isn't as well known as 1984 or Brave New World, but it is, in my opinion, most certainly should be right up there. It is just mind-blowing. This guy really knew what was up, and he really nails it by calling them mind parasites, because that's exactly what they are. So getting back to this concept that the mind isn't a private place, and there are people who've sort of tried to explain the science behind this. I actually sort of go into it a bit more in my book, Free Range Humans, where I certainly don't try to dance around the truth and weave it cleverly into a sci-fi kind of narrative. I just sort of really spell it out very plainly and clearly in this book. It's called Free Range Humans: Exposing the Matrix Control System and Awakening Your True Self. And I'll put the link in the description if you want to check this out. And you can also read the first 3 chapters for free, and there's an audiobook version. But anyway, in this book, I talk about the hidden forces, the negative forces in the mind parasites, because they're such an important function or they're such important forces to understand as we're trying to evolve personally, and especially on our awakening journey. Because as I said earlier, they'll try to interfere. Now, the mind, as I said, is in a private place, and I explain more specifically why that's the case in this book. And it's because whilst we have this physical body, which is anchoring our spirit and our consciousness into this 3D physical realm, we also have other bodies that are invisible, such as our astral body and our etheric body, and also we've got our soul, which I believe the soul is a combination of the astral and etheric bodies. But this astral and etheric bodies, they extend beyond the body, and how far exactly they extend, we're not sure. Maybe it's determined by the power and the level of development of your soul. Personally, some people's etheric and astral bodies may extend a very, very long way. But the point I'm trying to make is that these our hidden bodies, our astral and etheric bodies, extend out into hidden dimensions, hidden realms, and it's within these dimensions that these hidden forces lie. And what happens is, it's from that connection with these hidden forces that these parasites, these negative entities, can't interfere with us directly, that they can't really get into your body and actually take you over and control the way you move, although it can lead to that. There's definitely such a thing as full entity possession and demonic takeover, but that's that's pretty rare. But anyway, the influence they have on you is much more subtle. So what they'll try to do is they'll try to plant a feeling into your astral or etheric body, or plant a thought into it that you take for your own, that you assume as your own thought and feeling. And you assume that because we've all just assumed that the mind is a private place, and these hidden forces, these mind parasites, know that, and they want to stay hidden because they know that if you become aware of them, you will shine the light of your consciousness on them, and they'll scatter away. It's like the light of our conscious awareness is very toxic to them. They have to operate from the hidden parts of your psyche where you're not perceiving them. So what they'll try to do is they'll try to plant thoughts and feelings inside your mind that are so similar to your own that you don't recognize them as foreign intrusions, but they're always negatively slanted. So they'll always be something that kind of belittles you in some way, or makes you feel lower, makes your vibration lower, makes you feel down. So it might be it might be a thought of I'm worthless, or I'm useless, or those people don't like me, or my family hate me, or I'm fat, or I'm ugly, or I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm too thin, I'm too this. Or they could also plant cravings and impulses in you, so that they know will be self-sabotaging, such as an impulse to go eat a certain food, or an impulse to go take a drug, or an impulse to hook up with someone, have sex with someone that you shouldn't, or an impulse to go check out a porn site, or anything that can lead to self-sabotaging. And you might think that, a porn site is harmless, or a bag of chips is harmless, but what they'll try to do is get you hooked on it. They'll try to implant that impulse in you every day so that it becomes a habitual pattern. And so before you know it, you're kind of all of a sudden under the control of addictions, and that's what they want to get you into. They want to belittle you, they want to make you feel down about yourself, and then get you hooked on addictions, because the whole purpose of all this is to lower your vibration. You see, our astral and etheric bodies may extend out into hidden realms that they're operating in, but they can't influence us very much when we're on a high vibration. When we're operating from love, from a place of self-empowerment, of confidence, pure thoughts, we're basically operating on a vibration that's is pretty much invisible to these hidden forces, these negative entities. And if it's not invisible, then it's at least very, very difficult, if not impossible, for them to influence us. So they need to lower our vibration to be in more harmony with the lower vibrational hidden realms that they operate in. So they'll try to, as I said, they'll try to hook us into self-sabotaging thought patterns, self-sabotaging behaviors that will gradually lower our vibration. And the more that our vibration is lowered, the more strength they gain over us, the more we begin operating in their realms, and that's where they have more power. But not only this, when with the self-sabotaging patterns that they get us hooked into, it inevitably creates suffering. And they also love to create conflict between different people. So they might be planting thoughts in one person about you and planting thoughts about you about the other person, and that'll lead to tension and conflict, and that leads to a lot of an explosion of emotional loot, which, like, it can come out as anger or despair or hurt, sadness, pain, like any sort of suffering, and they feed off that, and that actually makes them more powerful. And that can actually lead eventually, as I mentioned before, that can lead to full entity and demonic takeover. And we see this with people who are like hooked on really heavy drugs like ice or things like that. I believe that's the end product of years and years of entity takeover of the body, where there's really no one home anymore as much, or they've really been kind of diminished to the background to a minor role, and what's actually mostly controlling the body is a negative entity that keeps them hooked on these heavy drugs, because it allows the entity to keep controlling the body. And that's why these people can act in such toxic and destructive ways and seemingly not care about us, because really there's no one home anymore. And that's a really sad state for someone to get into. And I would say it's like nearly impossible to rescue someone from that state, because they've just lost control. It would take unbelievable willpower. But it all begins at some point where these entities start implanting these thoughts and feelings into our mind. And what happens is, when the starting point of them gaining control over us is when we identify with the thought and feeling that they implant. So if we assume that every thought and feeling is our own, and we go, oh, that's a real thought, I really feel that way about myself, I really do think I'm ugly or fat, or I really do feel that person hates me, or I really do feel like I suck. If that thought comes into your mind and you identify with it as being true, then it will create a feeling in your body, and not a nice feeling, a low vibrational feeling. And what they'll try to do is hook into your traumas. So if you've had wounds and traumas from childhood, particularly, that are sort of hidden in your shadow as pains and they're not healed, the mind parasites, the negative entities, will exploit those. They'll try to exploit those. So the answer to all of this really lies in learning how to become the witness of ourselves. So when we awaken the true self and we become the witness of our thoughts, we can actually choose what to identify with. We can choose to identify with a thought as being true, or we can choose to reject it. And we really need to get to that point where we're observing all of our thoughts. Whereas most people, they're never observing themselves. They're so locked into their mind. They're so reactive to everything that happens in their mind, and they're so distracted by the outer world. They're never actually observing themselves. So the first step was, we must awaken that witness, and we must learn how to differentiate between true thoughts that are coming from our true self and true feelings that are coming from our true self, between them and thoughts and feelings that are being implanted in us. And the number one way you can know how to do that, and you can learn how to do that, is by the way these thoughts appear. Because when a negative thought is implanted in you, or an impulse or a craving, particularly like a craving to eat a food or take a drug or open a porn site, or whatever, binge drink, or anything self-sabotaging, you get the point. It will appear out of nowhere in your mind, and it will hit you really hard. It'll be like I need to do that. I really need to do that. So if you ever get that feeling or a thought, this comes up in your mind so rapidly out of nowhere, and it creates a really strong feeling in your body, generally, I would say nearly always, particularly if it's trying to lead you to do something negative or self-sabotaging, I would say that's always something that's been implanted in you by a negative entity. and that means you need to actually reject that. Now that takes a lot of strength, that takes a lot of willpower, and these entities rely on you not having the willpower to resist the temptations that they try to lure you with. So it actually requires you to observe yourself and sit with the uncomfortable craving that's coming up and go, no, this isn't me, this isn't in harmony with who I am, this isn't coming from my true self. Therefore, I'm actually going to just resist that, I'm going to reject it, and I'm not going to identify with that at all. I can tell that is coming from something negative. And so the more you do that, the stronger you get in that area. And it takes a lot of failed attempts. So I've been kind of practicing this for many years and have been aware of how these hidden forces can work in my mind for many years. And I still get tricked by them, because the smarter you get, the more subtle and cunning they get. And they really they catch you when you're not paying attention. When you're sort of this lost in your mind, you're daydreaming or not paying attention, not watching yourself, not present with yourself, they'll get you. They'll get you when you're least expecting it. They're very, very cunning. So we just need to get stronger and more cunning ourselves. But it takes a lot of failed attempts. So it's not about being perfect. It's not about being really hard on yourself. It's just about the intent. Just the starting point of trying to be the witness of yourself just already gives you a major advantage. So, this also has been talked about, in our culture, in our modern Western cultures. No one speaks about this. No one talks about these hidden realms. In fact, you kind of looked at as crazy, because people are so attached to what they can see. If they can't see it, then it can't exist. So the idea for most people of hidden negative entities, it's sounds like crazy talk. But the reality is, whilst we're perceiving this reality through the 5 senses of the human body, those 5 senses, whilst it's an amazing experience, they're actually very, very limited in terms of the full light spectrum of what exists out there in terms of frequencies. What humans can perceive out of the whole light spectrum is this tiny amount. It's 0.001% or something. It's there are so many frequencies and energies around us that are existing, that are there, but we can't see them because our 5 senses are actually quite limited. It's I can't see the Wi-Fi in this room right now, but it is carrying information that with the right instrument, laptop, I can decode. But without the laptop, if I told someone there was an invisible field full of information right now and we're swimming in it right now, they'd think I'm crazy. So it's really the same thing. I do believe there's hidden realms that exist that we can't perceive unless you're clairvoyant or psychic, that these beings exist in. But the thing is, even though we can't see them, and even if you're not clairvoyant, you can actually feel their presence. You can learn to become sensitive to their presence and sensitive to the negative effect they're going to have over you. So don't let the fact that you can't see these things deter you from resisting them. You can feel their presence, you can sense their presence, and you can know when they're injecting something in your mind by the suddenness that it appears with and by how it makes you feel. And especially if they try to implant feelings or thoughts of depression and despair and hopelessness, depression are their favorite things to try and make people feel, because it's when they get you in that state, they know you're vulnerable to anything. So it's those instances where we must try our best to not identify with those feelings, and it is really, really hard. So it's important to be vulnerable, have a support group around you where you can actually be in a nurturing environment, be really gentle on yourself in those periods. But also the most important thing is to allow yourself to feel it, not judge the feeling, even if it feels horrible, but just feel it. Feelings are like waves. They rise and rise and rise, and they can be intense, but eventually they'll pass over and they'll leave you. But it's in the risky period is when the wave is hitting, where you panic and you become really reactive to it, and that's where you go to all those self-sabotaging patterns and addictions, and in order to try to run from the feeling. We don't want to run from the feeling. That's what these hidden forces are relying on. And that's where, I didn't mention earlier, where pharmaceuticals play a big role. Pharmaceuticals are some of the biggest kind of like numbing agents that are out there. We don't want to numb ourselves. We want to feel, and that actually gives you, when you learn how to feel things that are coming up in your body and not run from them, no matter how horrible they are, it gives you an incredible power that these negative forces can't take away from you. So even though these forces are operating in the hidden realms, it's that seems to give them an advantage over us. But really, when we're operating at a higher frequency, we shouldn't be afraid of them, because when we're operating at a high frequency, there's really nothing they can do to us. Like for a lot of people get really afraid when they're talking about this topic, because like they panic. They're like, oh my God, there's entities, they're trying to fuck with my mind, and what do I do? But the reality is, they're not very powerful. They really, really aren't. The reason they have to manipulate us and exploit our wounds, is because they don't have much power. So when we're doing the right things, there's really nothing they can do to us. For example, when we're rejecting negative thoughts, when we're feeling our feelings instead of trying to run from them or numb them, when we're eating really healthy foods, keeping us in a high vibration, a lot of raw foods, a lot of in-season foods, when we're avoiding, GMOs and junk food and processed foods as much as possible, when we're eating healthy fats and things like that, when we're drinking fluoride-free water and really clean, purified water, when we're meditating, when we're getting a lot of sunshine, when we're what else is there? When we're exercising and sweating regularly, when we're surrounding ourselves with good and non-toxic people, all the things that keep us in a high vibration are the things that protect ourselves from them. And when we're in that high vibration, there's nothing they can do. Yes, they can implant thoughts, but thoughts can't hurt you. The thoughts and feelings that they implant in you can only harm you if you identify with them, and if you react to them, and if you go toward the self-sabotaging behaviors that they're trying to lure you into. So we really, really don't need to be afraid of these hidden forces. We just need to do what we need to do to protect ourselves. And that's why I really believe a lot of our world leaders, a lot of the key figures in our world are completely taken over by hidden negative forces. And that's why they've engineered an environment on this planet where basically everything is designed to sabotage the human body and the human mind and keep us in a low frequency. Like the mainstream media keeping us in a low frequency through fear, toxic junk foods, and getting everyone. Basically, they've created an environment where everyone's addicted to pharmaceuticals, junk food, drugs, alcohol, sex. Really low vibe pornography is just free and accessible to everyone. Propaganda through movies, vaccines, and the list goes on and on. It's this matrix we're in is designed to keep us on a low frequency so that these entities can manipulate us and feed off the subsequent loosh. And that's why it's up to us to take responsibilities, not take personal responsibility, not be victims of this, but do what we need to do to strengthen ourselves and keep our vibration high. And we're not going to be perfect, obviously, but we've just got to do the best we can. And these forces, they've been spoken about. This isn't a new thing that I'm talking about. These forces, these hidden negative forces, have been spoken about for thousands of years. They're spoken about in every religion throughout the world. Every tribal culture speaks about the hidden spirits, both the positive and the negative, and had ways to protect themselves. That was the role of shamans. The role of shamans in a tribe was to protect people. Or if you got sick, they knew that it was because of negative forces interfering with your mind and body. So the shaman would play the role of actually helping you heal, not just on a physical, but a spiritual level as well, and a mental level. And it's been woven within many books. The Mind Parasites book I mentioned before, there's also Carlos Castaneda's books where he talks about them. There are so many different books that refer to these hidden forces, but we've just really had it we've really had it lost in our modern Western world. And I think that is by design, because they don't want us knowing about them. They don't want us talking about them. So awareness is the first step. Awareness is really, really important, because without awareness, you don't even know the battlefield you're on. You don't even, particularly the battlefield of the mind, you don't even realize that you're in a battlefield. So they've already got a major advantage. So awareness is the first key. So let me know if there's any questions about this, or if you do want to delve deeper into this and how they work, just to delve deeper into this topic, and specifically about how these entities interfere with our minds on a daily basis. My book goes right into it, and also talks about how to protect ourselves. Treasure trove of information in there, but also the Mind Parasites book I mentioned earlier is a really great one. So anyway, as I said, it was going to be a pretty fringy and paranormal and out there topic. Probably a lot to digest there. That's why I tried to repeat myself quite a bit, because that's a lot of full-on information to take to learn that the mind is not a private place, and we're actually under attack there. It's a lot to take in, and it's probably hard to believe for a lot of people, but hope this does plant a powerful seed of awareness for you and allow you to win that battle on the hidden battlefield. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video.